So there is historical context for the suspension of habeas corpus. The Constitution specifically tells us when you can suspend habeas corpus. And it's important to note that that sentence is in Article 1 of the Constitution, which is where the congressional powers are listed out. So Congress does have the power to suspend habeas corpus if it's deemed like a public safety threat. So this has happened during times of war. For example, the declaration of martial law on the West Coast after the attack at Pearl Harbor. However, there's really only two historical examples of a president suspending habeas corpus, and it should be noted that both times courts later said, yeah, that wasn't really right. It really is a congressional thing, although the damage had sort of already been done. And that was under Lincoln during the Civil War and George W. Bush post 9/11. So let's talk about Lincoln, because that's the example you'll probably hear given the most. So Lincoln's issue in 1861, the first year of the Civil War, was the border state of Maryland, right? Maryland was a slave state, but they hadn't seceded yet. They wanted to stay with the Union. In fact, most of the Maryland state legislature was just anti-war. They were like, we just don't want this war to happen at all, partly because they wanted to keep their slaves, but also because they knew they were going to be literally caught in the middle. So the Maryland state legislature was basically passing laws saying like, hey, we are not going to comply. We're not seceding. We're staying with the US, but it's our state right to not comply with federal orders to like transport troops across Maryland to get them to DC. They were even ordering officials to like destroy railroad tracks so that it would hinder the war effort in hopes of just literally like stopping the war altogether. And Lincoln was like, yeah, you can't do that. He told his general Winfield Scott that if there was any resistance on the quote military line across Maryland, specifically from Annapolis to Washington, DC, that he or the officer in command was authorized to suspend habeas corpus if necessary. So he basically said, listen, I'm giving you as commander-in-chief the authority to suspend habeas corpus if you feel like people in the state of Maryland are not complying and are getting in the way of our war effort. This happened when a Maryland militia lieutenant, John Merriman, he was arrested for demolishing several state railroad bridges, which had been done at the directive of the Maryland governor. So this is a states' rights versus federal government sort of issue. He was charged with treason and thrown in prison and basically not given a trial. He was kept inaccessible to any lawyers. Like they were just like, nope, you're going in there for a while because we need to subdue this like low-level Maryland threat to get the Civil War going and be able to go and fight the Confederacy. Now this did eventually go to court. It didn't go up to the Supreme Court, although the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger B. Taney, ruled on the case, which I don't understand. But he basically looked at the case later and said, yeah, this is clearly a congressional power. Clearly the founding fathers didn't intend to give the president this much power. That's like making him a king again. Now, Lincoln argued, well, yeah, the only reason I did this was because Congress wasn't in session and this was like an urgent military need. When Congress came back into session, they indemnified Lincoln, basically said, yeah, you're fine. You shouldn't have done that, but you're okay. Let's move forward with the war.